Good afternoon, everyone. So, this session has 7 papers. One will be presented remotely. That's at 2:10. Our first speaker is Carolina Vieira. And may I have a pleasure to request you to present your paper?
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Carolina. I'm a research associate at Harvard School of Public Health. Today, now I'm going to present another study. Let's see here. Oops, okay. So in this study, we investigated the association and the relation between upstairs and basement radon measurements and upstairs and basement radon ratio in northeastern and midwestern United States. This is an important study because most of the radon measurements are obtained in basements, and basements the levels are higher than they usually where people stay most in their homes. So we expect that there is a overestimation of radon exposures. So as we know, radon can move upward from soil to homes, and the inside temperature and also relative humidity, air conditioning, heating can affect radon concentrations. And also, inadequate ventilation can increase radon concentrations in homes. These parameters are really important to estimate the impact of radon in the health outcomes related to radon exposures. And we now, understanding the upstairs basement ratio, will be able to better estimate the radon effects. And until we started all this research in 2015, and now we are, as I said in my previous presentation, we are fortunate because the Spruce Environmental Technologies has provided us temporal radon data, and now we are able to estimate spatial temporal models using this radon data since 1980s. As we know, radon is the main cause of lung cancer in non-smoker patient individuals, and the third cause of death in cancer, related to cancer in the U.S., causing 21,000 deaths per year in the United States. And also in our studies, we found that cancer radon exposures are also linked to non-cancer chronic disease as cardiorespiratory outcomes and pregnancy outcomes. So for this study, we had simultaneously basement and upstairs radon measurements of 14,000 locations, and in Midwestern and Northeastern. You can see we have short and long-term radon measurements. You can see here in the map, the red, here you can see the red dots are long-term measurements, and the blue dots, we have two kinds of blue dots. They are short-term measurements of charcoal, canister, and liquid scintillation. We analyzed the annual and seasonal upstairs basement radon ratio, and also by states. We also investigated geographical factors that could impact the upstairs and basement radon ratios. For example, soil composition, population size, and also climate, local climate for regions, not for states. In our analysis, we used per t-test to estimate the upstairs basement radon ratios comparing by states. We used log radon, and we used for seasonal analysis, we used short-term measurements because we were able to see seasonal trends using short-term radon measurements. And we, as I said, we investigated the potential effects of geographical factors. So here in this table, I know the numbers are terrible, but we compared the radon levels in basement and upstairs. And of course, basements, we have higher levels in comparison to upstairs, here and here. In Massachusetts, we have the highest number of measurements, short-term measurements. Long-term measurements mostly were kind of similar. We have higher concentration of radon, higher upstairs basement radon ratios in the Midwestern in comparison to Northeastern. And 28% of our measurements were long-term measurements, and 71% were short-term measurements.
What scale are those measurements? Is that picocuries?
Becquerels per cubic meter. So here we see how the levels of radon in the upstairs and basement were correlated. We see a strong correlation between basement and upstairs radon for all kinds of radon samplers. Here we see for scintillation, liquid scintillation, for charcoal canister, and here for alpha tracker. So these results, we can see long-term radon upstairs and basement radon ratios. We see that in Northeastern, we have lowest upstairs basement ratio in comparison to Midwestern. In Maine here was the lowest upstairs basement ratio. In comparison to Kansas was the highest. So, and here we see the short-term effects. Short-term effects, we were able to see how the trends of seasonal trends. We found that during summer, all these measurements were made the same way with locked homes, not windows, closed windows. We see that even that summer had lowest levels and winter had the highest levels. And yeah, in this also correct the short-term measurements because we had a lot of noise, and the seasonal trend helped to adjust short-term measurements. And here we see how the geographical factors impacted the upstairs basement radon ratios. We see here in the first map the population size, and we see that suburban population density had the highest upstairs basement ratio in comparison to other regions. We believe that this is mostly because of the higher volume of basements in in the homes in the suburban areas in comparison to rural and urban areas. So here in the second map, we analyzed, we called high geological radon potential, medium, and low related to uranium concentration. We see high when we have higher levels of uranium, and we found that in place with high geological radon potential, we have highest upstairs basement radon ratio in comparison to other areas. Here the red you have higher geological radon potential in comparison to the orange areas. And also, we investigated the composition of the land based in USGS maps and documentation. And we saw that coarse-grained sediments, we had lowest upstairs basement radon ratio in comparison to fine-grained sediments lands. And here, the last map, we see the impact of the weather parameters, the regional weather parameters. And we see that warmest region, although we have cold winter here, but they are warmer than the northeast region. And we have higher upstairs basement radon ratio in this region. So in conclusion, we see that the upstairs basement ratio is lower in northeastern states and higher in midwestern states, and mostly can be related to population density, geological radon potential, land materials, and climate. Lowest seasonal, we found summer to have lowest upstairs basement ratio in comparison to winter, the highest ratio. States with higher basement, as the suburban areas, we found higher upstairs basement radon ratios. And other factors can also impact this, like the geological composition and the heating and the ventilation of homes can also affect this ratio. Thank you.
About 5 or 6 minutes for questions. So.
Yes, please.
Yeah, why do you think population density would have anything to do with ratios of radon concentration?
Yeah, we believe because people in suburban area, for example, we have large homes with large basements, and that's why in urban we have higher the concentration population is highly concentrated, have low upstairs basement ratio. In suburban, that we have large homes, and not so many people, we have the highest ratio, probably because of the structure of the homes, and not specifically because of the number of population, the number of people, but mostly relate to the type of construction and the kinds of ventilation and the size of basement that can affect the ratio. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
You made no distinctions between the type of construction that was used, whether it's a masonry structure or a frame structure.
Yeah, this is actually a limitation of our study. We weren't be able to, because we analyzed these information by zip code, so we couldn't see exactly the kind of construction. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, Caroline, we're in Maine, where I'm from, and we've always used the general rule of thumb, 50% higher, 50% lower each level, how can you go?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't really see all the percentages that we had on there, but is that still a general good, when we're talking to our homeowners, our buyers, is that still a reasonably good number to use?
Oh yeah. Maine is the lowest upstairs basement radon ratios, as you saw, and also the areas with higher concentration of radon is it's really a small area. Maine is I think the best state to live. Yes. Okay.
We find the same in North Carolina too, down below where that study area was.
Okay, thank you so much.